Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to the Global Pair Forum. We'll just give a few moments for more attendees to be able to join. In the meantime, my name is Gilberto Bento. I'm Engagement Manager at Alira Health. This is the third edition of the Global Payer Forum following our great successes in 2003 and 2005. If you're coming back, thank you for joining us again on the Global Payer Forum. If you're for the very first time attending the Global Payer Forum, please know that this is an initiative which is organized by Alira Health in collaboration with our academic partners at the University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, as well with the University College of London, and which is generally funded by our sponsor, Takeda. Our aim for the Global Payer Forum is that it is a unique and open digital platform where healthcare stakeholders, including payers, patient advocates, policymakers, as well as clinicians, can have in-depth discussions on and share real case studies on how we are driving innovative access solutions to ensure that more and more we can optimize patient outcomes. This year's Global Payer Forum will be focused on the topic of where patient insights meet better outcomes and sustainable value. We'll have two webinars, so we designed this year's Global Payer Forum as a continuous educational experience. So please, after today and this webinar, where we'll be focusing on how patient insights inform payer decisions across the health system. And while next Thursday, on the 26th of March, at the same time, we will we'll be discussing how artificial intelligence can enhance patient data for improved outcomes and more cost-effective decisions. Before we start, we would like to briefly go over a few housekeeping rules to ensure that you have an optimal experience. First, I would like to inform you that all participants are muted during the webinar. However, we encourage your participation, which many of you already started doing with the questions that you've submitted during your registration. Thank you so much for that. We make sure that many of those questions will be part of the interactive roundtable later on. We also like you throughout today's webinar to ask you to submit more questions at any time via the chat that you see now. And we also will have interactive polls throughout the two events. Please keep your phones ready to scan the QR codes and participate in these polls. We want to hear from you, your opinions. Please note also that this session is recorded, and a replay link will be shared with you via email after the conclusion of the event on Thursday in the next few days. Well, kind reminder that all views that will be expressed in this webinar are those of the individual presenters, and that these webinars are for educational purposes only. The content should not be distributed to unauthorized parties. The Global Payer Forum is generously sponsored by Takeda. However, Takeda's involvement has been limited to suggestions on organizational aspects only. Finally, I would like to ask you to please complete the short survey that will show up in your screens at the end. We welcome your feedback, and it's very useful as it will help us improve future editions of the Global Payer Forum. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So before I present to you the agenda, I would like to invite Ahmad Bashar, the Executive Vice President at Alira Health for Pharma and the project lead of the Global Payer Forum for Alira Health, as well as Giri Schmeichel, the Global Head of Pricing and Tender Excellence at Takeda. So Ahmad and Giri will give you a welcoming on behalf of Alira Health and Takeda respectively. So with that, please, Ahmad, over to you.
Thank you, Gilberto. Let me start by extending my warm welcome to all of you guys, and thank you for joining us this year, Global Payer Forum 2023. The main objective of today's forum is to foster meaningful discussion and knowledge sharing between payers from one side and also the key healthcare stakeholder, with a particular focus on how patient insight can intersect with system priority to support sustainable access to healthcare innovation. For those who may not be familiar with Alira Health, we are an international healthcare advisory firm offering a full spectrum of services, including clinical development, research, technology, and data-enabled consulting. At Alira Health, we place patients at the center of our healthcare system by integrating their voices, preferences, and experiences across the entire product lifecycle. Today marks the first of 2 webinars, and I encourage you all to continue the journey with us in our second and final webinar later this month on 26th of March. We are really fortunate to have an outstanding lineup of speakers who will be sharing practical perspective and real-world experiences around those topics. Naturally, this initiative would not be possible without the invaluable collaboration of our academic partners, University Pompei Fabra and the UCL Global Business School for Health, who play a key role and critical role in shaping the program and ensuring academic rigor. Last but not least, we would like to express our gratitude to Takeda for supporting this educational initiative. Let me now please invite Jerry from Takeda to share welcoming remarks. Jerry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ahmad, and welcome everyone. And thank you for joining us for the 3rd edition of the Global Payer Forum. At Takeda, we are honored again to partner with UPF Barcelona and the UCL London. And thank you, Alira Health, for organizing the forum. We have today an outstanding panel of experts representing payers, policymaker providers, as well academics and patient organizations. So I am looking forward to having this discussion. So thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. I think this year forum comes at an important moment. Around the world, healthcare system are navigating rising expectations for value, increasing budget pressures, and rapid shift towards more patient-centered care. I think patient insights are becoming central to how care is designed, evaluated, and delivered. And today we will explore how these insights can meaningfully inform payers' decisions across the full care pathway. As well, the role of AI is evolving, and this is the topic for seminar 2, to understand the role of AI in like a patient-centered care in hospitals, but as well at patient homes. Takeda remains strongly committed to advancing value-based sustainable healthcare systems. We believe that embedding patient voice and patient-derived reward evidence can support and deliver with AI like a sustainable healthcare system. And that is kind of as well the tool that can like help and develop more powerful decisions and be stronger in decision making. So with that, on behalf of Takeda, let me welcome all of you, and I would like as well welcome to all the speakers. And now I would like to give back to Gilberto.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Thank you so much, Ahmad, for your words. So if you can go to the next slide, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. So soon you'll be hearing from Karen Facey. She will be our keynote speaker. She's the founding CEO of the Health Technology Board for Scotland and the senior HTA advisor for real-world evidence for decisions at Oxford and Utrecht universities. After her speech, she will be joined in an interactive roundtable by Martine Pergent, the president of the International Patient Organization for Primary Immunodeficiencies, Kelly Estrada Orozco, the former technical director at the Colombian HTA Institute and head of the Patient Safety Research Unit of the National University of Colombia, and also by Jan Oroniev, the founding CEO of Real Patients and the former consumer representative at US Food and Drug Administration. So with that, I would like to also introduce our moderator, Jorge Mestre Ferrandis. Is a he has spent more than 10 years at the Office of Health Economics in the UK. He currently serves as a board member of the ISPOR Spain chapter, and is a professor in health economics at the University Carlos III in Madrid, while also being a collaborator at the Center for Research in Health Economics at the University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. Welcome, Jorge. Before I hand over to you, let's hear from our audience for the first time. So I'd like to ask our backroom team to share the poll with you. So please take your mobile devices with you, and soon you will be able to scan a QR code on the screen to join this interactive poll. Alternatively, here it is. So you can scan this code, or alternatively, you can on your browser go to menti.com and enter the code that is displayed here on this slide. We encourage all of you to participate in this short exercise, and please note that all responses are anonymous. So I'll do that myself. So, and in this exercise, the key question is, at which stage of the healthcare decision-making process do patient insights have the greatest impact? So we ask you to rank these four alternatives. So we have already some answers. They are care pathway design, HTA evaluation, reimbursement decisions, contracting, and post-HTA implementation. So, and as the answers come through, I would like to ask then Jorge and hand over to him so that he can comment a little bit on your answers. So Jorge, thank you so much, hand over.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much, Gilberto and Alira Health and Takeda, as well as University Pompeu Fabra and UCL Global Business School, Health Business School, and of course our speaker, Karen, and our panelists. So we're getting some responses already. As you can see here, the winner seems to be the care pathway design, which I think reflects how important it is to listen to the patient, not just a very specific points in the life cycle of the care pathway, such as HTA evaluation or reimbursement decisions or contracting and post-HTA implementation. So certainly taking for me, the importance of the holistic approach when thinking about patient insights having the greatest impact. So I think with that, thank you very much for your responses. So now I've got it's an absolute pleasure to be back at the Global Payer Forum 2026, as I was also involved in the first other payer forums. So now I'm thrilled to introduce someone that I've worked very closely for many years, and our keynote speaker, which is Karen Facey, which among being an excellent person and very nice to work with. She's the founding CEO of the Scottish HTA body and a senior advisor in the HTA affiliated to the universities at Oxford and Utrecht. If you don't, probably most of you will know her anyway, but she has worked internationally to promote more structured and meaningful approaches to patient engagement in HTA and more broadly on decision making. And today she's going to focus on exploring the foundations of patient engagement and reflect from her nearly day-to-day experience on how patient insights can be credibly integrated, which I think is critical into healthcare governance and payer decisions. She's written lots of books and reports and articles, which I think have been very influential in shaping health policy and decision making. So with that brief introduction, Karen, the floor is yours, and thanks again for being our keynote speaker.
Thank you so much, Jorge, and to all the sponsors for giving me this opportunity. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I will be talking about how I see patient involvement in health technology assessment and in payer decision-making from my experience from the past 25 years. So if we go to the next slide, I'll give you a view of health technology assessment. And we all understand that health technology assessment is a systematic, scientifically based process that seeks to determine the added value of a new technology that we're considering for our health system and understanding whether we should invest in it. And traditionally, that process is based on the best available evidence, which we either get from a health technology developer, either from industry, or some HTA bodies, particularly in the non-device sector, will undertake their own research to do systematic reviews of published evidence. So we get a wide range of evidence, often from clinical trials, often developed for regulators. And when it comes to HTA payer decision, we have many uncertainties. We are unsure what perhaps the benefit is for patients. We increasingly see the use of intermediate markers, of which some would call biomarkers or surrogate outcomes. But what does that mean for patients and their day-to-day living? What outcomes are most important to patients? And if we undertake economic modeling, where we're looking at the costs and consequences in the long term of a new technology versus our standard of care in our health system, we want to understand long-term effects. We also need to understand our own care pathways, where this medicine would fit in that pathway or the device. And often we want to understand who will benefit most from the medicine if we can't reimburse a full population. Who would get most benefit from that? These are very difficult discussions that happen often when we're thinking about a new technology, and we often turn down there in the bottom right-hand corner to clinical experts. But what we want to say is that patients and their representatives also have important insights that they can input to this complex decision-making process that relates to the access of technologies to individuals. So if we go to the next slide, if we think about it, we can see that patients on the next slide come from a range of diverse views and contexts. They have their own cultural context, they have different stages of disease, they live in different ways, and all of these things are important. And so we need to recognize how we can involve patients, because an individual patient is often criticized by scientists in these processes being subjective. Are they representative? Are they in some way biased? We talk a lot about conflicts of interest in relation to patient involvement. So how can patients and their carers and representatives be involved in our complex decision-making processes in a fair way? If we go to the next slide, what we need to recognize is that in the next slide, you'll see great research from Dumez and L'Espérance, which was published in 2024, which identifies that patients bring unique knowledge that is built up within everybody. They have their own embodied knowledge of the disease and how it affects them. And they have learnt to manage their disease, to manage their treatments. They have that self-knowledge, but they also have system knowledge as they've had to navigate through health services, and we all know how challenging that can be. There's also community knowledge as we see the increase in involvement of patient organizations, but also other patients that they meet on their journey, and they have important cultural knowledge in different social groups. And if we go on to the next slide, what this tells us is that patients have experiences, perspectives, attitudes, preferences, values, and expectations that they can use to inform our payer decision-making processes. And that knowledge is not just about the health technology, which can sometimes be seen as being biased as it's assumed that patients want the new technology, but that's not always the case. That's a misnomer. But they can also give us really important information about the local care pathway, about the burden of their illness and their health issues. And so the way in which we can, in a sense, bring all those insights and knowledge in is through two major constructs, through research that we can undertake with patients to understand that wide range of experiences, perspectives, etc., and through participative processes. And in research, we can use either qualitative or quantitative approaches. And it's important to recognize that qualitative research is not some lesser degree of science. It comes from a long history in the humanities, from sciences like ethnography and anthropology. These are well-designed research studies that have clear protocols that can be critically assessed. And this evidence should be informing our decision-making alongside perhaps more quantitative research such as PROMs and surveys that are more commonly seen within our decision-making. And in terms of participation, we need to think about how participation can be used in our quite strict decision-making processes, because participation ideally should be responsive and dynamic. It can be important to give us local context, and it can give us authenticity and diversity of patient insights. And in the past, we've seen participation mainly focusing on written submissions where individuals or patient groups can input to a process, but also in some cases where an individual or a group representative is invited to a committee meeting to make opinions. But there are more ways in which patients can participate in our process. And if we go to the next slide, we can see here the wide range of areas in which patients could participate in our decision-making processes. And that starts from health technology developers, including patients in study design, and that's become more commonplace, I would say, in the past decade. And that's often an individual patient. But in terms of the HTA and decision-making process itself, patients can be involved right from the point at which we decide which topics should be undergoing HTA through to policy developments about how health technology assessment is organized. But we need to be thoughtful about who we involve. And you'll see here my proposals on the types of groups I think we should be involved. So sometimes we want individual patients, as shown in dark blue there, and in lighter blue, we need citizens. So you'll see there, I believe that on a decision-making committee, we need to have people without conflicts of interest, so they need to be citizens or service users. Whereas in most of the other areas, I think it's patient groups that have the knowledge of the diversity of patient experience that should be informing our decision making. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see here that participation needs to be thought about carefully. It was first introduced back in 1969. Many of you will have seen Einstein's 7-step ladder of participation. And that goes from, in a sense, tokenism right up to empowerment of patients. And in our setting of decision making, we need to be clear about how patients can participate and what difference their insights can make and cannot make. So we need to be clear that we're in a constrained environment in terms of budget, that we're all looking for health service sustainability. So these three principles I find quite helpful from Antoine Poivin, a GP in Canada, who's been very thoughtful about this process. There needs to be credibility. So when we are supporting patients to participate in a process, they need to have the ability to contribute knowledge that is considered valid and relevant. And if we support patient participation, it isn't just a one-way process. It ends in mutual learning and generation of new solutions. We need to recognize that those involved need to have some legitimacy to speak on behalf of others. And they need to have some power to be able to influence. There's no point in just having a patient sitting at a table if you really think that they're not going to be able to influence any of the discussions that are happening. That's a waste of their time. And these processes are burdensome for individual patients and for patient groups, and we need to recognize that. And those burdens are not just financial. in terms of preparation for some of these processes, but they're also emotional, as individuals feel perhaps sometimes that they may have failed if their views have not been heard in a decision-making process, and we need to consider these contexts. So if we move now to the next slide, we can see some examples of where patient involvement has made a difference. And this is an old slide from about 8 years ago, where we undertook some research with NICE in England and CADTH in Canada. And what they showed there was that CADTH, who at that point was undertaking qualitative research of their own, doing systematic reviews of the literature and interviews with patients, as well as supporting patients to participate in their processes, that this patient involvement was helping to clarify the outcomes that mattered to patients, and that could focus the decision makers. It was also addressing gaps in clinical evidence, and particularly in economic modeling. Often we see, for example, the states of an economic model being defined, but a patient would say, for example, actually, progressing through the disease in this state doesn't make sense to us. That's not what's important to us as patients. Other things matter. Often looking at how clinical trials perhaps differ from their own experience, and contributing to deliberative discussions about hard trade-offs. And if we move to the next slide, we can bring that experience up to date. And in the next slide, you'll see our latest book, which was published just about 6 weeks ago, which is the second edition of the book on patient involvement in health technology assessment. And in this book, we lay out the conceptualization for patient involvement, and I would particularly recommend reading the Justice Rationales, which is quite different. We also then look at methods, which includes a range of qualitative and quantitative approaches. And if we just go back to the last slide, you can see the range of countries that have contributed to the book. And you'll see there right from Australia through Europe, through Latin America, Singapore, Spain, and Taiwan. And exciting new chapters in here, for example, from the Philippines, who read the first edition of the book and decided that they wanted to implement their own processes. And you'll see that that book, if we can go back again, is available at the link shown as open access. And I'd just like to take a note here to thank Alira, who contributed to our crowdsourcing to fund the open access. And that has been incredibly important, because in the first 8 weeks of publication, we've had 150,000 downloads of the book. So we think there is some interest in this topic, and we hope that you'll all read it. And the book ends with a call to action. And if we move to the next slide, you can see our rainbow call of action. And that is that we want to extend participation in HTA to study design right through to policy development, to how we organize our payer processes. We encourage health technology developers to describe how they've involved patients throughout the life cycle of their development of their technology, and to report that very clearly, so that is clear to decision makers. We need to invest more in research, both in terms of industry and in terms of payers. We need to support this patient research. We need to broaden participation, particularly in underserved communities. We need to build skills, particularly in HTA bodies, to show this breadth of patient involvement that can really inform our decision making. We need to agree on the goals for patient involvement and evaluate and continuously improve the processes we undertake. And we need to respond to patient involvement so that those involved understand how useful their input has been, and we continue to co-create processes with them. So with that call to action, I'm going to finish, and I look forward to hearing my panelists and joining in discussion. Thank you.
Always, Karen, it's a pleasure to listen to you, and I think you bring so great insights, and with all your hands-on experience and especially with all the worldwide collaborators that you work with, that you can illuminate us. And I really like your rainbow call of action, because I think, as we were saying at the beginning, we are in a very important period of time where countries are moving towards really listening to patients, but we need to do it right, as you say, and we need to do it correctly, and everybody has to be aligned. So thank you again for that really nice overview. And I know we could be here with the book, and of course I strongly suggest everyone to go to the website after we finish the forum, of course, and you start reading the chapters. Okay, so we're gonna now move to the interactive round panel session. So we're going to be I'm also very honored to be joined by Gilberto. Introduced them briefly earlier. So Martine Pergent, Kelly Estrada Orozco, and Jen Hornjeff. And apologies if I didn't say your names and surnames correctly. So you see my colleague panelists. So I just wanted to give a couple of comments before we start. First of all, a reminder to our audience that if you want to submit questions, you of course can do it, and we will try to answer as many as possible during the day. And we have also Gilberto there, who's keeping an eye on the questions. Hello, Gilberto again. And before we actually move into the actual panel and discussion, just flagging that we've divided the panel into 3 key topics, which you have there in the slide. First of all, patient insights across the care continuum. Second, key decision points for patient engagement, which are kind of the more positive views. And then we know there are gaps, so we certainly, we need to discuss those gaps as well. So with that, and before going into the details of these 3 topics, let me introduce briefly again our 3 panelists. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question to each of them. So if I start with Martine, Martine brings that global perspective of patients with primary immunodeficiencies, with, of course, long-standing advocacy for meaningful inclusion of patient voices in healthcare governance. So the question here for you, Martine, is if you could introduce briefly yourself and explain to us what is the role of these international patient organizations in supporting payer decision-making.
Yeah, thank you, Jorge, for the question, and also to the organizer for having us. This is a great pleasure and an honor. So IPOP is the International Patient for Primary Immune Deficiencies and Associated Disease. This represents more than 600 different conditions, rare conditions, and we advocate throughout 80 different countries, because our members are national patient organizations representing both children and adults with those conditions. So, patients and carers for the children, they live with the condition on a daily life, and they become experts of it. Why on earth would we make decisions on access to treatment without having all experts on board? So including patient is a must do, I have to say. And I think Karen made it so well that it's difficult to add to her words, because she had such an experience and she embraced the whole thing. Anyway, we advocate for patient-centered decisions, and this means that patients should be taken seriously. And this meets the different criteria that Karen has highlighted, the credibility, legitimacy, and power of influence. And this we do for several decades now. because we think that patient input into payers and HTA decision covers life experience, preferences, and patient-reported outcomes, and they are used to inform coverage and reimbursement. And at IPOPI, our mission is to allow people to be early diagnosed and timely diagnosed and well treated, meaning appropriately personalized treatment. And this means, of course, availability and affordability of the treatment. This means access. And of course, the situation when it comes to our patients is very diverse globally. But we can see that payers do use patient-reported outcomes and real-world experience, but often in an ad hoc manner, non-systematic way, and we expect their importance to increase over time. So patients, especially those with chronic diseases like ours, emphasize affordability, predictability of out-of-pocket costs, and the broader impact of insurance design on their daily life and mental health, often more strongly than payers may anticipate. Having seen that, and this comes to your first question and the poll, we need patients to be on board since the very beginning of the development of a diagnosis, would it be a medicine, medical device, or diagnosis even, because it reaches the access and coverage questions. So to guarantee that the product will meet the real needs of the patient and prove being the most appropriate and most efficient for them.
Thank you, Martine. Thank you. Those were really good reflections, and I agree with you. You know, we see very much ad hoc without proper systematically incorporating, and this is something that hopefully one of the outcomes of this webinar and Thursday's webinar is that we get decision makers to be more systematic about the incorporating patient insights into decision making. Okay, with that, we're now going to move to Colombia with Dr. Kelly Estrada Orozco, who has deep experience in HTA, in public health system governance, and institutional decision-making frameworks. So Kelly, of course, welcome to the panel. And your initial brief question is, if you could please share with all of us about your most recent experience leading to the improvement of HTA processes in Colombia.
Thank you, Jorge, and thank you to all the organizers for inviting me here to this space to share with you and all the audience, of course, our experience from the Latin American countries. So it is a pleasure to me to be here as a first, I think, ponent of this global forum representing to Colombia. I am a medical doctor, I am an epidemiologist, and I expert in methods, and I am doctor in public health as well. And for the last 10 years, I have been working in evaluate the health technologies and make some decisions in terms of policies, first for all countries in Latin America. But for the last 6 years, I work as a leader of the technical groups in the Health Technology Assessment Agency in Colombia, as you mentioned. So there we improve some of our methods incorporating formal framework as a ETD or evidence to decision framework under the grading approach to try to involve the voice of patient as an active actor. It is not just as a consultative aspect for the health technology assessment. It is to the participation of the patient in all and each one of the steps of the health technology assessment in Colombia. It is to try to prioritize and using the information that are relevant or important from patient perspective to try to classify, identify, and of course prioritize the outcomes that are critical, important, or not important in the process of decision making at the government level. And of course, another important point that we improved in Colombia was the introduction of the qualitative methods, formal methods to analyze and obtain information to each one of the process of health technology assessment to support the decision in the health ministry in Colombia. So other important aspect that I can to introduce here as a first information is all the improve that we gain in the last year trying to involve the patient in the deliberation, in the discussion of all the recommendations, and they are active actors in terms to produce technical informs that support all the policies and all the decisions for the health ministry in Colombia since the Health Technology Assessment Agency in Colombia. So again, it's a pleasure, and I'm more than happy to be here and share with you and all the audience our experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And from what you were saying, you know, I think what Martine was saying, not to be ad hoc but to be systematic, I think that was precisely what you were trying to do in Colombia, and have, as you were saying, an active actor. The patient is an active actor, and is not just someone to go and check if they are okay with whatever decision you have to make. So I think that kind of incorporates what Karen was saying, what Martine was suggesting we should do, and actually your real life example, which is what you were trying to do. So thank you very much for those reflections, Kelly. So as you can see, we have truly a global payer forum. And now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our third panelist, Jen Horenhef. As you can see, the founding CEO of Real Patients and former consumer representative from the FDA. So you certainly have, Jen, extensive experience advancing structured patient engagement across the regulatory and the development process, and we separate Europe with regulator and payer. But of course, the US is a bit different. Well, it's a bit different. And what I would like, you know, for your first initial question, with all your regulatory experience and FDA experience, if you could share kind of your drivers at the work you do and the work you've been doing over the last few years. And of course, welcome Jen to the panel.
Well, it's such a pleasure to be here with such a wonderful panel, so thank you for having me. So I'm Jen Horenhef, the co-founder and CEO of Real Patients, and what we do at Real Patients is patient insights. The reason why I care about this so much is because I do consider myself a patient. I grew up with multiple autoimmune diseases. I was diagnosed as an infant, so I really have lived as a patient my entire life. I had a brain tumor as an adult, so you know, things just kept accelerating, and really saw the need to make sure that we were understanding what mattered most to patients. And specifically in the US, you can also understand, I was originally pre-med as a child, but I saw that medicine here was so challenging for my providers to be able to practice. And that ended up kind of turning me off for following sort of the same pathway, because from a payer standpoint, they couldn't prescribe the kinds of medications that they wanted to for me. So it really opened up a viewpoint of how can we help make sure that the patient perspective is included in that. So that led me through a career as a human factors engineer and a human-centered designer. I was an academic studying patient-centered outcomes, specifically in clinical trial outcome measure sets and treatment guidelines, to understand what the priorities are for both patients and care partners within that experience. And through that line of work, it led me to also be an advisor on several of the FDA advisory committees, reviewing sponsor applications. And it was my role, or chosen role, to be that provocateur and really try to challenge those that were, you know, reviewing these applications of, did we measure what mattered to patients? Because we're getting a lot of perspectives from the sponsors themselves, from providers. Historically, we've relied on them for patient experience. And my academic research really showed a discordance between the priorities of patients and caregivers, who do have different priorities, as well as then, you know, the other stakeholders. And at the end of the day, it is us patients who have to take these medications and struggle through access issues. It's my sort of personal soapbox that we call patients non-compliant, yet we don't design these systems or products or services with them. And so therefore, when they don't work for them, the onus is put on patients. And so that's where sort of my work was really centered around, how can we make sure that the patient perspective is included earlier, and from sort of a drug development process, which ultimately then leads to the payer discussion, we need to understand value. And so we need to do that work up front, understanding the outcomes and endpoints that are most relative to the patient experience, so that when I, as a patient, am having that clinical conversation with my provider and I say, you know, which medication is going to cause me less fatigue, and they say, I don't know, we didn't measure it, that's not helpful to us as a patient. So that's really what sort of my role has been over the years through several different seats within industry and academia and with regulators, is challenging my professional colleagues to make sure that we understand the patient perspective. And I'm grateful to say that, of course, we've made a lot of progress, and that's why we have such a wonderful panel here, because we're all now doing this work together. But I think there's still a long way to go to turn this work from like a nice to have, isn't that cute, to include patient perspective, to being grounded in business objectives that we can actually do better work, get better treatments to market, provide better care if we understand and include patients in the process from the beginning.
Thank you, Jen, and you're spot on, because ultimately the evidence you generate through the development process is what you're going to use for the payer and the regulatory decision making. So if incentives and objectives and priorities are not aligned, certainly we're not going to generate the information that really matters for patients, and that's why we're here. Okay, great. So that was excellent. I think that was a great introduction, and I know we've only got 1 hour and a half of the webinar, and I know we have to stop on time. But okay, so now let's move into our 3 main kind of themes, and here, if I'm not wrong, we're going to see the second Mentimeter, and remember, the first topic is around patient insights across the care continuum. So we're going to ask you a question that you will see in a second. Here you go. We're going to ask you, how can patient insights help healthcare system generate value and optimize resources? And there you see we have given you 5 options: reduce low value or inefficient reimbursement decisions, improve adherence and real-world treatment outcomes, prevent avoidable hospitalizations and downstream costs, enable more effective value-based contracting and performance tracking, and currently have limited measurable impact. So we start to seeing the responses. Please go to your mobile and see and start voting. We're seeing a bit of a winner here, which is adherence, which we know is one of the very important issues, that the lack of adherence, and how important that can be, because then not just, well, for a number of reasons, because treatments don't work as they should work. Me being an economist, that leads to a huge inefficient use of resources. So okay. And then second is around more effective value-based contracting. So that's excellent as well. I remember the 2 first global payer forums were really about also value-based procurement and contracting. So that reflects nicely. But we see clearly, I think, a winner, which is the improvement of adherence and real-world treatment outcomes. So that's really good, because ultimately at the end, we want, of course, the patients to use the treatments correctly and properly, and of course that they can generate those outcomes. Okay, so that's great. Thank you very much for the audience to being so proactive in responding. So with that in mind and what we have said, so I have a couple of questions from the audience already, and I wanted to ask Karen and Kelly, and we have to be relatively short in your answers, but Karen and Kelly, with your real HTA experience and reading dossiers, and what for you really makes a credible, robust patient evidence? You know, what evidence do you actually require to make those decisions? And then for Martine and Jen, I will ask about impact, but given Karen and Kelly with their HTA hats on, so evidence, you know, what kind of evidence do you want to see?
Maybe I'll
You
start.
start,
So,
Karen, now.
yes, so I sit in Scotland on the Non-Medicines Appraisal Committee, and actually I think patient involvement for medical devices, for procedures is really important. And there we undertake our own secondary research. So we do systematic reviews to answer very specific questions about the use of the technology. And so, for example, with robotic surgery, we wanted to know what patients' views were about robotic surgery, about the difference in outcomes and difference in side effects that come with different forms of therapy. Those are often the kind of questions. So just like any other good systematic research we'd undertake for clinical effectiveness, we have a clear plan, we have inclusion criteria, we report it clearly, we critically appraise it. And actually that is the same for any kind of research. If we're looking at undertaking our own primary research, we would engage with experts. Like I would never do an economic model, Jorge, I'd give it to you to do because I'm a statistician, I'm not an economist. The same with research. We should be engaging with social scientists to undertake the research with patients. And they have all the processes in place and we can then critically appraise it. So it's high quality research. And we need to recognize that when we use the word qualitative research, it doesn't mean low quality. It's a different form of scientific endeavor, and we need to start valuing it.
I totally agree. And of course, we're not saying RCTs on the clinical efficacy endpoints should be disregarded and if they're not important, but all that information has to be complemented with, as you say, high quality, qualitative research. So thank you for that, Karen. So Kelly, from your experience in Colombia, I mean, what kind of evidence were you using that you thought was of high quality?
Yeah, so for the question, Jorge, I trying to summarize in three critical aspects from the payer perspective and all the responsible of the decision making in Colombia. I think that we can introduce the legitimacy, the representativeness, and the transparency. They are values that they evaluate in a high form. So the first is because we need to prove that all the process is with a low risk of any potential conflict of interest, and it include the participation in Colombia of the independent committee that evaluate, analyze, and suggest different ways to accept the participation, but mitigate or reduce the risk of incorporate in terms of the discussion or any other part of the process, the introduction of conflict of interest. The second is the representative, because we have not an individual as a patient. We have a patient that represent collective, the group of patients that are living with the condition of interest for the health technology assessment. So we need to map in and add some methods here to try to identify all these actors that are relevant for the discussion and they are relevant for obtain information, or discuss this information as well, and trying to understand how is the role of this participant in terms of the collective of patients, and of course the transparency. And it is because if we need to understand this information as a body of evidence similar to any other sort of information that we have as a clinical trial, as a epidemiological study, we need to present in a rigorous form all the process that we follow to try to minimize the risk of bias in this information, in the selection process of this, the participant, and the way that we use to collect information as well. So it's totally transparent to present the limitation of this information as well. And this, I think that is high valued for the payers and other actors in the health system.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And you're right. I mean, we have to be rigorous and minimize any bias, so that what Karen was saying, we don't discard qualitative evidence because we think it's not robust enough. So, but if we do it properly, we can complement that evidence from the more traditional clinical RCTs. So with Martine and Yen, do you have in mind any concrete examples where this patient-derived evidence has actually made an impact?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully yes.
Yes.
So Martine, any example that you can flag here?
Yeah, as this was highlighted, patients will address the quality of life. And I'd like to give two examples. One old one, which is outdated for Europe, but still really relevant for many places in the world, and a recent one. The first one is about immunoglobulins with a plasma-derived medicinal product. And it happened that it was usually given with the IV intravenous. And then came a formula with subcutaneous. And from the HTA perspective in some countries, it was very difficult. They asked about the added value of this medicine compared to the other. And obviously, the efficacy is the same, the safety is the same. So why would we need that kind of a formula? Of course, the patients were not at all in agreement, and with them the physician, well, not all the physicians at the beginning, because some of them, they thought that plasma-derived products should never leave hospital. Why did we advocate for that and still do in many countries in the world? It's because subcutaneous is the same value for medical stuff. But when it comes to home therapy, this allows this. And when you have a chronic treatment and you have to go for this treatment to the hospital, would you live in the capital city or even in a remote area? This is not the same story. So this was of utmost importance for access to have this subcutaneous immunoglobulin given as a choice to the patients so that they can access their life-saving treatment. My second example would go for gene therapy, because in Europe we have one gene therapy, at least two nowadays, but the one for our conditions. And it happened that in one country, European country, one patient needed that, but this therapy was only for children. But this ultra rare patient was an adult. So this person was denied the access to gene therapy, which was not only a saving, but also a curing therapy for these conditions. So we advocate among the government of this country, and then with the support of the physicians, we could have this patient treated in the center and saved. Just to show that medical value is something very important. Added value is obviously important, but as Jen has highlighted with fatigue, this is also something that we bring over and over again when it comes to a treatment.
Thank you, Martine. That's really helpful to see real life examples. Yen, from your regulatory perspective, any example you would want to highlight about having an impact?
Yes, well, I mean, also disclaimer, I do not represent any regulatory bodies, but I'll share my experience. First, I would like to thank Karen for calling out that qualitative research is just as valuable as quantitative research. I can't tell you how many conversations I've sometimes had with those that have clinical and scientific backgrounds, that when they come to real patients and talk about engaging us to be able to connect with real patients to understand their perspectives on whatever project, I've heard we have to do quantitative research so that we can publish it, as if qualitative research is not valid research that is publishable, of which my PhD would then be invalid. And so I think that really helping to raise the conversation related to this type of work is critical. So thank you for highlighting that. And it's really what we do, and the work that I do every day at Real Patients is to engage companies, innovators, researchers directly with patients and caregivers so that they can understand those priorities. Because we do see, and sometimes impact is both hard to measure as well as can take time to measure to see those things implemented, because healthcare is slow, but we have seen a lot change related to even what we're measuring in a clinical trial. So we have, again, we do a lot of work with pharmaceutical companies, and they'll come to us now earlier on not only for endpoint selection, but also what measures are we using to make sure we're capturing that. And so for the academic audience here, you can appreciate even the instrument selection of the patient-reported outcome measures that we are using. We need to make sure they're still measuring what matters to patients. Because if we're using ones that essentially are outdated and have a ceiling or floor effect because medications and treatments have changed over time, then it's not really valid for today's patient. And as one example, the health assessment questionnaire that's typically used to understand people living with rheumatic diseases and helps to measure their activity level or their physical abilities, asks questions about picking up coins off a table or using a touch tone phone. And when we do cognitive debriefing with those patient populations, they'll say, well, I use Apple Wallet now. Or I don't have a touch tone phone, I have a smartphone. And so therefore we need to make sure that we're not using old instruments to then make judgments for what patients need today. So I think that's another place that we see impact, is helping people understand where we need to reassess how we are measuring patient outcomes. But yes, we've seen, different applications go to regulators that now are including patient perspective. I have conversations daily about our colleagues in the pharmaceutical and biotech space trying to understand what do we need to do to meet these thresholds around patient engagement and diversity and inclusion within, what regulators are requiring, because they never give you an exact roadmap of here's exactly what you need to do, to get that, check and seal of approval. And I actually think that that is well intentioned, because as a researcher, there is no one size fits all, and we really need to do fit for purpose research in this way to truly understand what's the research question and how can we best raise the highest quality insights to get it. But I think that's where people struggle, is it's still this tension of like, how much do I really need to do? I believe that people are well-meaning with it, but I also understand the realities of timelines and budgets that make people need to know, like, just what is the bare minimum that they need to do. And I think that we're getting more and more pressure from these regulatory bodies to do that. And that's where people need to, work with folks who are in this space to understand what is the right approach to get that kind of work done.
Great, thank you, Jen, and thank you for all the panelists. So let's move then to theme number 2, which is around key decision points for patient engagement. So we're going to have the third Mentimeter. So what is and the question here is, what is the most urgent therapeutic area for patient involvement? So here, Gilberto, people have to type the therapeutic area that I think is more urgent. And let's see if we get any responses. Come on, audience, you need to start typing. Don't be shy. Remember, it's all anonymous. We won't know who you are. But in the meantime, while we are, if we get any responses, Gilberto, just wanted to ask you, as we've said, if there are any questions from the audience.
Hi, Jorge. Yes, we have a few questions. Maybe going a little bit into the lane that Martine was mentioning about. I mean, she's talking about the importance on subcutaneous interventions and the relevance of data for to have that, and patient data for that. So how do you see new care models such as home care and health and telehealth? Can they serve as an enabler for patient voice integration, or are they themselves, their adoption driven by patient voice? How do you see that these care delivery models?
I think at IPOPI we advocate for the choice, for the preference. as Jen again has highlighted, one size doesn't fit all. And this is very important to have a choice and to go for that is the best for you. That said, I think that COVID-19 pandemic had helped us to understand a lot of things. And for example, home treatment has been valued very much during this period, because when you are a patient with a weak immune system, let's say, maybe you don't want to go to a hospital, and this is much better for you to be treated at home. And same for telemedicine, that has proven being very helpful during this period. And also the period has helped for the adoption of this. So I think that we need to consider the different ways to address the needs of the patients and also their preference, and also accept the fact that a patient may change during his lifetime, because this is not the same when you're a child with the parents over you, when you are an adolescent, when you are an adult. And now, because we treat our patients very well, so thank you also to the payers for that, for the elderly patient, because we have now patients who reach 80, which is fantastic for our conditions.
Any from the other panelists, anything about the new models, the new care models, or not so new, but you know what I mean?
Well, I'll weigh in with a US perspective on this from a telehealth perspective, because of how reimbursement works here in the United States. That, thank you, Martine, for mentioning COVID-19. I think we saw obviously a lot of changes roll out really quickly, which showed that we can do it. We can offer telehealth visits. We can allow people to get care that way. And I had such trepidation about what was going to happen when luckily the world reopened, but would we go back to old models that here in the United States, because of reimbursement and licensure, that patients could not be offered telehealth if they were not in the state of which their provider was. And this became a huge issue, and we did roll back to that now it's making it that much harder again for patients to access care. I, as a complex patient, have providers across the country to go see specialists that I have seen, and I have traveled to and from and flown across the country to see those providers. And during the pandemic, I was allowed to see them via telehealth. However, afterwards, that was stripped away from me, and we reverted back to those old models that you have to be in the state. I have a family of providers as well that also offer telemedicine, and they share stories about patients having to drive just across the border of that state to be able to log on and have their appointment. And frankly, other patients who are just trying to get around that. And so it just goes to show that we have the technology that can make this so much easier and lessen the burden on patients. But unfortunately, this is again where systems make that challenging. So coming back to my previous comment about being non-compliant, if I realize that I don't have time to go and drive 2 hours to the other state to make my doctor's appointment, I'm now non-compliant. But I could happily log on and talk to my provider if I was given that option.
Great, Jen, thank you both. So I was surprised that we didn't have any answers. Indeed, we have answers. And then you see rare diseases and rare disease. That's the Mentimeter, of course, with different letters, you get different answers. But certainly, rare diseases is kind of the winner in terms of the urgency. And I guess my interpretation is because of the lack of information and knowledge around rare diseases in general, and hence the difficulty of having more standardized clinical development programs, or so what Karen was saying, complementing, and all the other panelists, complementing the more traditional clinical evidence that we or payers are usually observe. But certainly it's not the only one. We think about obesity now, which is, not rare whatsoever. Then we have mental health, neurology, all of them. So I think that's also an important remark to say that at the end, we don't want to create more inequalities across different disease areas. But I guess if we should prioritize, we might be able to start with with rare diseases. So thank you very much for those questions. So now we're going to move quickly to the third theme, which is kind of, I guess, the more negative part of the discussion in a sense. I don't know, we are running a bit out of time, but before we go into the third, we're going to have here the final Mentimeter, which is about barriers. So there you have 5 options in terms of what is the main barrier preventing patient insights from being systematically integrated into payer decisions. And I'm going to ask my panelists to start thinking about a short answer to this question about barriers. In particular, what is driving the barriers? What are, in your experience, what are those root causes driving the barriers in terms of implementing or integrating patient insights into payer decisions? So we see here different definitions of value across stakeholders. I always say I'm an economist, so we don't really know what value means, and it depends on who answers the question about what you value. And I always say, you know, in my classes also, you know, the demand side for health technology, you know, broadly speaking, you have the payers who don't decide and don't use the treatment, but they pay for it. You have the clinicians who don't use it and don't pay, but they decide. And then, of course, you've got the patients who, maybe excluding the US, but patients who usually don't pay and don't decide, in inverted commas, but use the treatment. So certainly we have here 3 stakeholders that might have very different incentives or value definitions of what they want to pay for. And certainly the winner here seems to be those different definitions of value. We have no clear ownership, I think, or structured process. I think that's very important. We already heard from Kelly, you know, that there is a way to integrate if, I guess, decision makers want, and give you kind of for the technical people to implement it. The evidence is not robust enough. Well, we've heard from our panelists. You know, there is good evidence out there qualitatively. So maybe we should take that, you know, that one of the key points is we need to improve how that evidence is being generated from the patient's perspective and making sure that it's high quality. So any initial from my panelists, I mean, Karen, given any immediate thoughts on these results, on what, you know, the root causes of this barrier or barriers?
I think for me the process one is key, because HTA and payer decision making have to be clearly set in process, because it's probably open to legal challenge. So process is important. But I'm reflecting back to Daniels and Sabin, those great ethicists that drive accountability for reasonableness. And they said that not only is process important, but evidence is important. So I would like to say, think about that knowledge, think about the knowledge that patients can bring, and we need to work out how to bring that into processes. I would also say that something that isn't mentioned here is funding. And funding is a big issue. So in England, NICE used to pay patient organizations for the time, a sort of honorarium for making a patient group submission, because it can be a huge amount of money for a patient organization, which is a not-for-profit voluntary organization. But that funding was taken away in a funding squeeze. Whereas I would say they still pay for their economists who critically assess the company's kind of submissions. So actually this requires investment in capacity development, but in resources as well. But we should be getting better quality decisions if we do this in the right and best way.
Kelly, given your experience and your good experience, I would argue, with incorporating the patients as an active actor. Do you have any sense of what barriers did you get to actually achieve that, and how did you manage to solve those barriers?
Yeah, the group mentioned before, I think that we have some problems to try to conciliate the perspective of the patient in terms of the definition of the most important outcomes to try to incorporate it in the process of evaluation, and what matter from the payer perspective, because we have some misalignment here. So for patient health-related and quality of life, for example, well-being, functionality are important, but it is not exactly that payers prioritize in terms to define how can they assign the resources in health systems. So for the methodologies as well, it's not easy to work with this kind of outcomes. So we need to standardize the way to analyze this information, and we need to build some tools to try to collect free or minimizing the risk of incorporating risk, as I mentioned before, to treat with this outcome specifically. And we have some work to do here. Yeah, but I think that one point that is necessary is to institutionalize the use of framework that include and organize and systematically define what are the stage where patients need work in terms to support the decision for that. And another point that we need to consider here is to define as soon as possible what is credible evidence from patient perspective. So we need to make a series of judgments to try to understand in a more transparent way all the information that we are involving in this process, and that's it that I can say.
Can I very quickly, were you able to show to the Colombian payer the benefits of implementing that patient perspective? Because I think that's, and I'm going to ask also Martine and Jen that question before kind of come up to a wrap, because for me what is important here is to show the payer that the system benefits. You know, it's not just asking for the patient to say and express their views for the sake of expressing their views because we think it's important, which we think it is, but any evidence on the positive impact on those?
Yeah, so I can mention three critical aspects that we consider in terms to support this kind of decision at the government level. The first is in the definition of the outcome, of course, because it is the way that we define what is the best option in the middle of many options that we have in the system now. So the perspective here is to understand what matters for patient. It is what are the main outcome that we can include for this evaluation. And another aspect that we can mention here is the participation of patient in the definition of the value threshold. We hear in Colombia the definition of the therapeutic value threshold. And it is important because it is to quantify or try to define the magnitude of the benefits that it's important for patient. It is the real benefit that they means for the clinical practice and not just in terms of statistically significance. So this data is so important to define the price or the cost that we will paid for this technology in the future. So this estimate the real value of this technology, and this depends on the perspective of the patient, the outcome, the magnitude of the benefit from this perspective, and the user of technology as well. And third point that I think that is so important here is involve the patient to identify some barriers in terms of the continuum of the healthcare process, because we can guarantee, if we understand these barriers, we can guarantee the adherence, the usability, and of course the acceptability of this technology that we are recommending in a health technology assessment process or after the evaluation, and we can guarantee this real value that promise this technology from the primary study or clinical study in the real world practice. So all this information is important because we have not this information from the literature. We need to listen the voice of patient to try to incorporate that in terms to assign in the best way the resources in our health system. So for all that reason, patient voice are really important in terms of resources in our system.
Thank you, Kelly. So Martine, Yen, any additional short reflection? Because remember, I'm gonna ask you one final question to wrap up. And we have 10 minutes. So Martine, any immediate reactions to the barriers?
Yeah, very short. This depends on the countries first, because this is national, even sometimes regional. And so maybe we could consider harmonization. HTA would be very helpful if they could harmonize a little bit their framework. And in this perspective, the HTA stakeholder network at European level is a very good step for that. I think also I agree with Kelly about the misalignment of values. I think this is very important what you highlighted there. I'd like also to insist on the fact that from our perspective, when we look at our patient organization at national level, they are not armed to face HTA bodies. You know, this is so complex. This is so difficult to understand how this works. This is really demanding for those patients who most of the time they have no staff. They are just working on the table of the kitchen, as I usually say. So this is very important to consider. First of that's the reimbursement, so that they can be resourced, and also their training, because this is important to have real patient with the knowledge and the ability. You highlighted that, Karen. This is very important to have the ability to address the subject. And last but not least, I was fearing, well, I faced something about newborn screening in the country where we were not admitted as patient representatives because we were seen as having a conflict of interest, and they wanted us to have patients from the ground, which was of course very difficult to find because those subjects are so complex. This is just impossible to have a real patient going in front of people who have a very technical and complex language, etc. I promised to be short, so I stopped there. But the interest for patients, this is terrible.
Yeah, I have to admit, I mean, over the last few years, I've done a lot of training with patient associations from an economics and market access perspective, and I agree. I mean, sometimes we speak very different languages, to be honest, and the skills.
And then, if you allow me to add the last word, I fear that rare diseases, not that I complain because I think that rare diseases bring a lot, but they may, as well as low-income countries, be marginalized in those HTA process because, of course, HTA bodies would focus a bit more on more prevalent conditions. And then,
great, yeah. Thank you, Martine. Yen, any very quick, before I ask the final question to the four of you?
I'll share, again, US perspective. A main barrier that I see here, in contrast to our work with pharmaceutical companies, when we work with payers, there is this misconception that they already know the patients because they already have their data and are seeing usage of filing claims and otherwise. And so that's something that's very different, that we have found less adoption around including patients with payers as well as health systems and providers that are falling back on the type of data that they're collecting because of patient member interaction and saying that that is the patient experience. And we're saying, no, there's so much you're missing to truly understand what a patient goes through. You're seeing that you denied them, and there's so much more to it. So I would say that's one of the biggest barriers that we see with payers, is this misconception that they already understand the patient journey.
Okay, so I know we're running out of time, and you have, the four of you, you have literally 30 seconds to say your final words. And I don't want to, I'm going to be very flexible. 30 seconds to say whatever you want. So I'm going to move in my screen clockwise. So I'm going to start with Martine, Kelly, Yen, and Karen. So 30 seconds, Martine. Your elevator pitch of 30 seconds.
I would say capacity and literacy. Patient may lack the methodological and health economic literacy needed to engage comfortably with complex dossiers. On the other hand, payers may lack structure and methods to translate narrative testimony into decision criteria.
Excellent. And I think that's a very powerful message. Kelly.
Yeah, I have to say that I think that the most important that I can advise from the health technology assessment perspective is to try to institutionalize a framework, a formal framework to incorporate the voice of patient. This is not an option. We need to consider in each one of the parts of the process to evaluate and recommend for the governor or any other level in the health system the voice of the patients. So we need to define as well the what is credible in terms of patient evidence and try to standardize for all the process.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Excellent final reflection. Yen?
Well, to build off of what Kelly shared about having a framework, I tell everybody my last final words is always ask patients, but to have a framework to make this more of an operational process so everybody understands this is truly important, because I do believe that this benefits every single stakeholder when it's done well. It benefits business objectives, value for the patients, and just the better lived experience for those individuals. So making that an operational imperative is what I would like our audience to leave with.
Thank you, Yen. Excellent. So Karen.
I think my key message is identify your champions. And this is for all stakeholder groups. Industry needs to identify how they can ensure that there's real patient engagement across the whole technology life cycle. In patient groups, we see patient champions who are, as Martine alluded to there, working at policy level to improve patient involvement. We also see in HTA bodies, people who understand it, researchers who try to encourage this, who work. But where there's real success is where it's the head of an agency, a director, a Ministry of Health that takes this on board. And I just want to fly a flag for the Czech Republic, where the Deputy Minister of Health, in his time in the Industry Association, then in academia, and now in the ministry, has championed patient involvement, and it's now written in legislation for their orphan medicinal product reimbursement process. And they fund a patient support unit, and they fund patient engagement in their process and training for that. So champions, champions, we need them across the sector, and we need to engage in policy opportunities to make this better, taking account of all the things that Martine, Kelly, and Jen have said.
Great. So my final words are, before I hand over to Gilberto, it can be done. It certainly can be done. It can be done very well. So with that positive note, Gilberto, apologies for running a bit over, but I couldn't say no to all this discussion, and I couldn't tell my panelists. So let me thank personally Karen, Martine, Kelly, and Yen for all the great prep work that you've done. And I'm sure we will see each other very soon.